Hey ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here, and today we're going to be doing Unit 4 Notes 2. So we are going to talk about factoring by grouping. So what is factoring by grouping? Well, we use factoring by grouping to undo the distributive property. So that's something that we did in Unit 3. We worked a lot with the distributive property, and that's when we were factoring polynomials with 4 terms, okay? So this is only going to apply when there are 4 terms. So let's talk kind of through the steps, okay? So the first step is to write the terms in groups of 2. So you're going to make groups, hence the term grouping. Then you're going to divide the GCF out of each group. So you're going to look at each group separately and take the greatest common factor out of each group respectively, okay? Then, taking a look at number 3, check to make sure that your leftovers are matching. So once you take out the greatest common factor, make sure that what's left over is matching. Then you're going to write the leftovers as one cohesive factor. Then you're going to write the greatest common factors together as the other factor. So that sounds kind of confusing, but once we actually kind of get going with it, I think it'll make a little bit more sense. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor by grouping. Okay, so just focusing on this first group here, I'm asking myself, what can I divide x squared and 2x by? Well, I can take an x out of each term, and then I'm left with x plus 2. Okay, out of my second group, what can I divide 4 and 8 by? Well, they're both divisible by 4. So then I'm left with x plus 2 when I divide each of those by 4. So now when I look, x plus 2 and x plus 2, now I notice that they're the same factor. So since they're the same factor, I'm going to write that down as one of my factors. So since the leftovers are matching, I know that that's one of my factors. Then on the outside, x plus 4, x is on the outside. So I have x here and I have plus 4 here. Well, that's going to be my other factor. So I'm going to go ahead and write x plus 4 as my other factor. And that's it. When you're done factoring, you should have 2 factors, okay? X plus 2, x plus 4 is our answer. So you're going to have 2 binomials. Okay, so taking a look at number 2. So number 2, before I even start, I want to take a look to see if there's a greatest common factor of the entire thing. And I actually noticed that each of these terms are divided by 3. So even before I start doing my factoring by grouping, I'm going to divide each term by 3. And I do that because, first of all, you're going to have to do it eventually. And second of all, doing it at the beginning, in my opinion, makes things a lot easier. And if you help remember to divide that by 3, that would help Miss Humbert. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's factor by grouping. Okay, so here's a group and here's a group. So but now I'm just focusing on this first group and asking myself, what can I take that out of x squared and x? So I can take an x out. And what I'm going to do for the time being is I'm just going to ignore this number 3. I'm going to go about my factoring pretending like this 3 doesn't exist. It's kind of like when you go to the mall, you bring your little sister, you ignore your little sister the entire time, but you need to bring your little sister out with you at the end. That's what that 3 is going to be. So we're just going to ignore it for the time being. And then between 3x and negative 6, I can divide everything by 3. So when I do that, I'm left with x minus 2. So then we have x minus 2 as our leftover. So that's going to be one of our factors. Okay? Then on the outside, we have x plus 3. So those are our other factors. Then finally, I need to remember my little sister from the beginning. So I need to take that 3, and I'm going to put that on the outside. Okay? So that's our final answer for number 2. Taking a look at number 3, check to make sure there's a greatest common factor, and there's not. So I can go right into factoring by grouping. So what divides 2x squared and 5x? Well, that's just going to be x. So then I'm going to get 2x plus 5. And then what divides 4x and 10? Well, that's going to be 2. Okay? So out of that second group, I'm going to take out a 2. Okay, so I notice now that my leftovers are matching. That's good. So one of my factors is going to be 2x plus 5, okay? Then x plus 2 is what's left in my other on the outside. So that means that x plus 2 is my other factor. So this right there is my final answer for number 3. Taking a look at number 4, I'm noticing that I can divide each of those by 5. So what I'm going to start by doing is dividing each of these terms by 5 and taking out a greatest common factor to start off with. So I have x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6. Okay, so now what we're going to do is factor by grouping. Okay, so here's a group and there's a group. Okay, so again, ignoring that little sister till the end. So I can take an x out, and then I'm left with x minus 3. And then out of the next group, I can take a 2 out, and when I divide everything by 2, I'm left with x minus 3. So what's left over, that's going to go in my first parenthesis. And really, if you flip-flop the parentheses around, it's still the same answer. So taking what's on the outside, my second parenthesis is x plus 2. Now let's say you did this and you got x plus 2 times x minus 3 and they were flip-flopped. That means the same thing, because if you think about multiplication, 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. So that means that these are the same thing. Last but not least, we can't forget our little sister, and we need to have that greatest common factor multiplied on the outside. All right, let's take a look at number 5. So for number 5, we're going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and make my groups. Between 12 and 21, I can take out a 3, and then I have p cubed and p squared. Remember, I want to take the most amount of p's without overdrawing my bank account. So between those two terms, I can take out p squared. Well, 12 divided by 3 is going to give me 4. P cubed divided by p squared is just going to be p. Negative 21 divided by 3 is going to be negative 7, and the p squareds are going to cancel out. So then 28 and 49. From each of those, I can take out a 7. Now remember, if you're still struggling to figure out what you can take out of each of those terms, remember you can always write out that list. So 28 divided by 7 is 4, and then p. Negative 49 divided by 7 is negative 7. Okay, so then we have 4p minus 7 as one of our factors. Then from the other factor, we have 3p squared plus 7. Okay, now that just came from the outside of the other two. So that right there is our final answer for number 5. So taking a look at 6, it looks like we can take out a greatest common factor of 2, but we can't because we don't have 2 with that r. So there's no greatest common factor we can take out. So we're just going to jump right in. Between 8 and 64, we can take out an 8 and an r squared. So I'm dividing everything by 8r squared. So 8r cubed divided by r squared is just r. Negative 64 divided by 8 is negative 8, and r squared over r squared is going to cancel out. Taking a look at the second one, when we have r and negative 8, there's nothing we can take out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write a 1 on the outside as a placeholder, because taking out a 1 really doesn't change the value of a problem, and that's going to leave that r minus 8 there at the end. So then I have r minus 8 that I factored out here, and then from that I can take out the 8r squared plus 1. Okay, so again, this was my leftovers, and that's what was on the outside. If they're flip-flopped, that's okay. It's still the same answer. Next, let's take a look at number 7. So we're going to go ahead and factor by grouping. Now, there's nothing I could take out as a greatest common factor, so I can just jump right in. Between 2 and 12, I can take out a 2. Between x cubed and x squared, I can take out an x squared. So we're dividing everything by 2. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. X cubed divided by x squared is just x. And then 2x squared over 2x squared, a lot of students think that they just cancel out and they want to write 0. But it actually is 1, so you need to make sure you write plus 1 in there. Then between 30 and negative 5. So I notice now that there's a negative sign. When there's a negative sign at the beginning of one of your parentheses, like it is here, you need to take out a negative greatest common factor. So I'm going to take out a negative 5. Because when I do that, when I divide everything by a negative 5, negative 30x divided by negative 5x is a positive 6x, and negative 5 divided by negative 5 is a positive 1. So let's say you do this and your leftovers don't match. You have a different sign. Check that that GCF should have been negative, because that happens sometimes. So then one of our parentheses is going to be 6x plus 1, and the other parenthesis is going to be 2x squared minus 5. So that's my final answer for number 7. Now, let's take a look at number 8. So for number 8, what we're going to do is factor by grouping initially. There's no greatest common factor. So between 6 and 16, I can take out a 2. Between v squared and v cubed, I can take out v squared. So 6v cubed divided by 2v squared, that's just going to be 3v. Negative 16v squared divided by 2v squared is just going to be a negative 8. 21 divided and 56, what divides both of those? Well, that's going to be a 7. Okay, so I'm going to write that on the next line because I'm kind of running out of space. So 21 divided by 7 is 3v. 56 divided by 7 is -8. Again, so if these two aren't matching, then you did something wrong. So make sure that they're always matching. You can't just say, oh, well, I guess this one doesn't work out. They should always be matching. Okay, if not, you did something wrong. So then on the outside is 2v squared plus 7. So that right there is your final answer for number 8. Last but not least, let's take a look at 9 and 10, and then we'll be all done here. So taking a look at 9, splitting it into groups. Well, let's just start with the numbers. What divides 12 and 3? Well, that's going to be 3. I see that there's an x squared in each term, so I know I can take out an x squared. There's a u in the first term, but not in the second term, so I can't take out a u. Same thing with the v, because it's not in both terms. Well, 12 divided by 3 is 4. The x squareds cancel out, and I'm left with u. 3 divided by 3 is just 1. You can write the 1 if you want to, but you don't have to. X squared over x squared cancels to 1, and then we're just left with v. Okay? Between 28 and 7, I can take out a 7. Okay? And then I see that there's a y in each term, so I can take out a y. So then what I end up getting is 4y. Wow, it's not letting me write. That's super nice. Okay, so then we're going to end up with 4u, because I took out the y, plus v. Okay, so here my leftovers are matching. So one of my parentheses is going to be 4u plus v. The other parenthesis is going to be 3x squared plus 7y. Again, I want to make sure I have all of those variables, and it doesn't matter which order you multiplied it in. So that's your final answer for number 9. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 10. So same thing, we want to figure out what numbers and what letters we can take out. So between 40 and 25, you can take out a 5. You can also take an a from each term, but I can't take out a c squared from each term, and I can't take out a k squared from each term. So those need to stay in. So 40 divided by 5 is going to be 8. A over a will cancel, and I'm left with c squared. 25 divided by 5 is just 5. A over a cancels, and then I'm left with k squared. Okay? Now, out of the second group, 32 and 20, what can I take out? Well, I can take out a 4. There's also a b in each term, so I know I can take out a b. Well, 32 divided by 4 is 8. B over b cancels, and we're left with c squared. 20 divided by 4 is 5. B over b cancels, and I'm left with k squared. So these right here are matching, so I'm going to write those out as one of my parentheses. And then in the other parenthesis is what's going to be on the outside. So that's going to be 5a plus 4b. So that's your final answer, and that concludes this note video. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.